The defense for the Phoenix Mercury in game one, what they learned from game one and applied in game two is an adjustment late that shifted things for their defense in a literal and figurative sense, and how that can be applied for them going forward to be a solve against everything that is going up against Courtney Williams and pick and roll. So let's dive into the details, have some fun with the film, and talk some hoop. And what we're going to be watching is Courtney Williams boogieing in pick and roll. So you already see it right away. You get an immediate screen reject. She does a good job of selling where she knows the defender is ultimately wanting to get to in terms of beating her to the spot as far as the screen goes. So at this point right here, you see where Sammy Whitcomb is. She's doing a good job standing in front of her matchup in the ball, but this is where Courtney Williams manipulates the game because she takes what's being anticipated from defenders and then has a sleight of hand. Her body language sells that she's going to use the screen. Her eyes and her shoulders and her disposition all sell that she's getting ready to use this drag screen until she's not. And as soon as she sees and feels the weight shifted from Sammy Whitcomb, because it's a kind of secondary break, there's no one that's occupying the paint at this point. And because she's kind of manipulated things and she's won on leverage, getting her shoulders downhill, she's done a good job just winning on leverage and just winning this possession, again, manipulating the game. And there's no one there at the rim to contest that opportunity for Courtney Williams. Again, another rep. This is not bad defense from Sammy Whitcomb. This is just a great player making plays and taking advantage of different intricacies of the game within the game, that is playing pick and roll and trying to defend against pick and roll when you're kind of playing to the scheme that the Mercury are in this early part of the film session. So this rep here, we're going to see Sammy do a good job of navigating over. She gets clipped a little bit, but the multiple efforts from her get her back into the vision of Courtney Williams. And this is a good contest. This is a contest that you'll live with if you're the Mercury. The issue is, how many do you live with if a player shows that they're going to continue to take and going to continue to make these types of shots at these junctures of the game? You have to be able to try to take something off the board. And if Courtney Williams is getting to her proverbial kill spots like she is here, honestly, sometimes the best defense in the world can never trump excellent offense. And that's kind of what we see here in this situation. Sammy Whitcomb with great screen navigation in terms of the multiple efforts dynamic of it. It's just not enough because of the great shooting and prowess and mid-range pull-up ability of the one and only Courtney Williams. Clip number 3 here is going to be a little bit more of the same that we saw in the first rep. And that's another screen reject. The eyes tell lies, finds a crevice to creep through in terms of getting downhill. And then she does a good job again after selling it with her body language, ultimately winning downhill, and then finding a pocket between where the closing defender is that was initially guarding her at the point of attack is, and where the next defender is that's going to be stepping up. She finds that sweet kind of pull-up pocket, that mesh point, if you will, nestles into that and gets up a little soft touch runner right here. Again, these are just the rigors when you're trying to guard someone that's as dynamic as Courtney Williams, in particular with pick and roll coverage. And then this last rep here, this was the one that just wasn't good. For timing in the game, when you look at where the clock is, 2 minutes and 11 seconds in the fourth quarter, and you're trying to find some rhythm to creep back into the game, and it's just the Mercury not being on the same page. Sammy Whitcomb, at this point right here, you look at her disposition, she's trying to influence Courtney Williams to a certain pocket of the floor. That's all good and well, but if you're not on the same page with the person that's in coverage in terms of the person guarding the screener, what you're going to see is a result like we saw here, which is just unacceptable regardless of what time of the game it is. And that's a straight line drive from the point guard with almost 20 seconds on the clock. Courtney Williams is timing up the release. 19 seconds on the clock. She's going from holding the person guarding her in pick and roll to ultimately getting downhill completely undeterred without a help defender in sight. That's just a miscue between Sammy and Alyssa Thomas. It's rare, but it's something that can be mitigated in addition to the other reps that we saw where Courtney was manipulating the game and finding her pockets and things like that. Play the game in game one entirely too much on her terms. And what we saw from the Mercury in game two was a switch that was made, literally and figuratively. And I spoke with Nate Tibbetts about that post-game after game two. Here's what he had to say.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that we decided to do when we went small. We've kind of been waiting to see if when the time was to do it, the players spoke up and used their voice, and we did a really good job of recognizing it. We saw the roles, and then we helped each other behind it.
So that's important to note. Everything that Nate mentioned, we're talking about switching. The Suns or the Mercury, excuse me. It's been a long couple of days. The Mercury going from playing a more traditional style of coverage to bringing their bigs closer to the level of the screen and hedging and things like that, mixing in some unders at times and pick and roll with Courtney Williams as well, to ultimately landing on switching. And it's not just a literal passing of the baton off from one defender to another. There's a timing mechanism to it, and there's a physicality element, and there's an approach in terms of angle and taking certain pockets of the floor away from the ball handler that is Courtney Williams with intentionality. And I mentioned that for multiple reasons, and we'll be diving into that with the film here. So now we're getting into the game 2 adjustments from the Mercury. First half of game 2 was a lot like the general game in game 1, where the game was being played on Courtney Williams' terms in pick and roll. Paint touches, layups, midi pull-ups, three-pointer pull-ups, finding those pockets to manipulate the game and stay in dictation to the defense. And what we're seeing now is the Mercury playing chess and getting ahead and honestly throwing a little bit of a checkmate in the flow of the Minnesota Lynx. So no different than in game 1. We're seeing them get into their double drag action. And you see the point of the screen and where it's taking place for the Minnesota Lynx. Way up the court, no different than the New York Liberty would with Sabrina Ionescu. And I mentioned that the adjustment in this series was taking what you did against Sabrina in the Liberty and flipping things and kind of just switching things up a little bit, because though they're similar players and they spend a lot of time in similar contexts of play with similar personnel around them as well, you don't defend the Liberty the same way that you do the Lynx and vice versa. So it takes a little bit of adjusting. Naturally, you get to a post-game 1 and you get to a halfway through game 2 and you finally get to that point. And we get to the fourth quarter here, and we're watching Sammy Whitcomb trying to navigate that first screen. And she doesn't have to now. And that's the point that I'm getting at. Because she doesn't have to work too hard to try to fight over both of these screens from both of the bigs on the Minnesota Lynx lineup right now, because she's switching it, it allows for her to not have to exert as much effort, but it also puts Alyssa Thomas in the perfect position to do what she's the best in the WNBA at, and that's hedging. So it's not just a hedge to disrupt the angle, but it's a hedge to switch. So what Alyssa Thomas is doing, she goes from that hedge point right here. As you see Courtney come off of the screen, Courtney stops in her tracks because this is not what she's been seeing and anticipating coverage-wise. She's expecting for Alyssa to be a little bit below the three-point line and for Courtney to be able to have either a pull-up pocket or a space to kind of manipulate the rhythm of it and ultimately try to get downhill, get a paint touch, maybe get a layup or a floater up, or potentially entice Alyssa Thomas into contact and potentially induce a foul. None of those things happen here because of the angle and the aggression of this hedge from Alyssa Thomas. But it's not just the angle and the aggression, but her also being able to stick with Courtney Williams as the dust settles on play after the play. So nothing comes of that. And then we're going to ultimately see Alyssa Thomas doing a great job defending the isolation. And now, as we take it back a little bit, and you see what happened on the ball, you also want to pay close attention to exactly what happened off the ball. So you get the hedge to switch from Alyssa Thomas on Courtney Williams. Now watch what's going on with DeWanna Bonner and Sammy Whitcomb. So you see the switch. It's a triple switch that takes place. So you get switch number 1 taking place on the ball. Switch number 2 is Sammy Whitcomb is initially on Alana Smith as she's getting ready to roll downhill. DeWanna Bonner is going to kick out switch her off of the roller so that they don't have an advantage that they're creating on the roll downhill to potentially post up or put in position for an offensive rebound. So all 3 players is very quick here, but switch number 1 has to switch. Sammy Whitcomb is switched onto the initial screener, and then DeWanna Bonner is going to kick her off of that switch. They keep their defensive shell intact, and now you're forcing the Minnesota Lynx to play later in the shot clock without the rhythm that they were looking to establish. Job well done. You get another switch there, and you're going to see them do a good job all the way up to the layup. Kayla McBride could make that layup, but she doesn't here, and it's largely because it's taking place late in the shot clock, and the Mercury are doing a really good job with their activity on their switches. All right, there you have it. I think that being able to switch more of the pick and rolls that Courtney Williams is in, whether it's for pockets of a game or with certain lineups that they're using, or if they decide to go to it for a significant portion of games going forward throughout this series, I think is something that could truly be a wrench in the process for the Minnesota Lynx, because it takes away one of the main pressure points for their offense. If they take away the Courtney Williams pull-up pockets that she loves to find, and she has to go up against Alyssa Thomas and Satu Sabali or DeWanna Bonner more often than not, what does that do for their offense? Do they have counterpunches and stalls so that they can still find production and keep their flow without being succumbed to the physicality and the activity of the Mercury defense? We're going to find out in Game 3. It's going to be the most telling one. I do believe the winner of Game 3 is going to ultimately go to win the series. And I think that the defense for the Phoenix Mercury against the Lynx is what's going to help them have a much better chance in winning this all kind of deciding Game 3 on Friday.